Arizona Territory, 1882. The sun had long since burned the tracks silver when the last train pulled away, leaving only dust and a woman in white on the edge of nowhere. Evelyn Boone stood alone on the rickety platform of Arkley Station, her gloved hands gripping the handle of her trunk like it was the only solid thing left in her world. The station was little more than a rough bench and a wooden sign nailed crooked above a doorless shack. No ticket man, no telegraph office, just wind and silence. Her fiancé was supposed to meet her, but he had not come. Evelyn's pale blue skirt fluttered in the dry breeze. She had sewn it herself with pearl buttons and a matching bonnet because she wanted to look her best when she stepped into her new life. She had crossed 2 states and 3 trains to get here, following a promise scrawled in ink on a letter now folded carefully in her pocket. The promise of a marriage, a home, a man who said he would be waiting. But the platform was empty. The sun dropped lower. Shadows stretched out across the desert. The tracks shimmered, but no train came. No wagon either. Just the sound of wind dragging across the sand and her own heart thudding in her chest. A coyote howled in the distance. Evelyn sat on her trunk. She unpinned her hat and pressed it to her lap, her spine straight and her jaw set. She would wait. She would give him time. Maybe something had delayed him. Still, as the light dimmed, something inside her began to fray. An hour later, a rider came. The sound of hooves on hard-packed dirt rose from the canyon trail to the west, and Evelyn stood quickly, brushing dust from her skirt. Her heart surged with hope. But it was not the man she had expected. The rider was tall, lean, with a sun-darkened face and a dust-streaked shirt. His horse, a dun mare, was lathered from the ride. He pulled up short when he saw her, eyes narrowing beneath the brim of his hat. "You waiting for someone?" he asked, voice low and rough with the road. Evelyn lifted her chin. "Yes, I am. My fiancé was supposed to meet me here. His name is Thomas Keller. He wrote to me." The man dismounted slowly, glancing around the empty station. "Nobody's come through here in days. This line only stops twice a week now." "You have a place to go?" She hesitated. I was supposed to go with him to his homestead. He said he had land near Bisbee." The man's jaw tightened. He looked down, then back up at her. "Ma'am, I hate to be the one to say this, but Thomas Keller ran off last week. Took off with a saloon girl and a saddlebag full of debts. Folks say he left the territory." Evelyn blinked. The words hung in the air, heavy as thunder. Her lips parted, but no sound came. "I am sorry," he said quietly. She sat back down on her trunk, staring at the sand. The man didn't walk away. He stood there, hat in hand, like he was trying to weigh what to do next. Finally, he said, "Name's Callum Shepard. I wrangle horses for the McLean Ranch 2 ridges over. I only came this way because I heard the train whistle and figured someone might be needing help." Evelyn looked up at him. "I suppose I do." Callum rubbed the back of his neck. "You got any kin nearby?" "No. Only a sister back in Kansas. But she married a railroad man and moved east. There's nothing for me back home." He glanced at the sky. "You cannot stay here. There are cougars in the hills and the coyotes come down at night. You will not make it till morning. I do not have money for a hotel." "I am not offering a hotel," he said. "I have a spare room in the bunkhouse. My boss won't mind, long as you help peel potatoes or mend shirts while you figure out your next step." Evelyn studied his face. He looked like a man who had seen hard things and carried them quietly. She nodded once. "All right." Callum helped her with the trunk, lifting it onto the back of his horse like it weighed nothing. He offered her a hand and she took it, letting him steady her as she swung up behind him. They rode in silence for a while, the sky turning lavender as the sun disappeared behind the ridgeline. "You have family?" she asked after some time. He hesitated. "Had a little brother once. He died in the war. Parents too. Just me now." She did not press him further. By the time they arrived at the ranch, the night had gone full dark. The bunkhouse was a long, low building with a cook fire burning out front. A few ranch hands looked up, surprised to see a woman riding behind Callum. He led her inside. The spare room was small but clean, with a cot, a basin, and a window that opened to the stars. Evelyn turned to thank him, but he had already gone to fetch her trunk. Later, after she had washed her face and combed her hair, she stepped outside. He was sitting on a barrel whittling a piece of wood, the fire casting a soft glow across his features. "I do not know what I would have done if you had not come," she said. Callum looked up at her. "You will be all right, Evelyn Boone." She smiled faintly. "You remembered my name." "Hard to forget," he said. For the first time all day, something inside her eased. She sat beside him. The desert was quiet and the fire crackled low between them. He handed her the piece of wood. It was a little hoarse, rough but solid. She ran her fingers over it. "You carved this. Thought maybe you could use something to hold onto." Evelyn swallowed hard. "Thank you." He looked at her then, really looked. And something passed between them. Not a promise, not yet. But maybe the start of one. And when she finally lay down that night, she slept without fear for the first time in days. Morning stirred the air with the scent of mesquite and ash, faint and dry. Evelyn stepped out of the bunkhouse and into the quiet yard, her hands tucked into the folds of her skirt, eyes tracking the slow movement of men saddling horses and loading feed into a wagon. No one paid her much mind, just a few nods and a tip of a hat, but she preferred it that way. She wasn't ready to be seen as anything yet. Not a jilted bride. Not a charity case. Not even a guest. Just a woman figuring out what came next. Callum stood near the corral, sleeves rolled to the elbow, one boot braced on the lower rail. He was speaking to a younger man with a crooked hat and a long scar down his jaw. His posture didn't shift when he saw Evelyn, but after a few more words to the other man, he made his way toward her. "You sleep all right?" he asked. "I did. Thank you." He nodded once, then adjusted his hat against the sun. "You any good with a needle?" "I can mend well enough." "Good. Cook's got a pile of shirts and trousers that need patching. You can use the long table behind the bunkhouse." Shade stays there most of the day. Evelyn followed him around the building, where a plank table rested beneath a canvas strung between two posts. A stack of worn clothing waited beside a tin pail of buttons and a basket of thread. She took a seat, tapping the dust from her palm before drawing out the first shirt. Callum lingered, his shadow stretched long across the table. "You don't have to rush. Take time if you need it. I'd rather keep my hands busy." He gave a single nod and turned back toward the corral, but not before she caught the way his gaze paused on her just a second longer than necessary. By midday, the sun pressed heavy across the yard. Flies hovered near the cook tent, and the scent of salt pork drifted weakly through the air. Evelyn stood to stretch her back when a girl no older than 12 approached from the main house, a basket in her arms and her braids slung over one shoulder. "Mama said you might want this," she said, holding it out. Inside were 2 biscuits wrapped in a flour sackcloth and a tin cup of sweet tea, still cool from the spring house. Evelyn took it with both hands. "Tell your mother thank you." The girl nodded, then looked back toward the corral. "You talked to Callum yet?" Evelyn glanced up. "I have. He doesn't say much, but he looks after people when no one else does." "That's so." The girl shrugged. "When my daddy died, Callum found my brother work at the mine and bought my mama a mule so she could take in laundry from town." Evelyn didn't answer right away. She watched the girl skip off toward the house, braids swinging, barefoot and unconcerned. Later, after the shirts were folded and the thread packed away, Evelyn wandered toward the barn. She didn't go inside, just leaned against the frame and watched Callum work a bay gelding in a small round pen. The horse was wary, stepping light and quick, but Callum moved slow and sure, never raising his voice or rushing. His motions were clean, almost quiet. He didn't push, just waited. Let the horse come to him. "Is it always like that?" she asked, not moving from the shadows. He didn't startle, just rested his weight against the fence. "Some take days. Some don't ever come around." "What makes the difference?" "Trust." The word hung between them, not heavy, but real. She stepped closer to the fence, fingers grazing the rough wood. "You ever think about leaving this place?" "Used to. Thought maybe I'd go north. Oregon, maybe Montana. But the land's good here. And the folks. It's quiet. You like quiet? I do. They stood in silence then, but it wasn't empty. The wind stirred the dust, and the horse settled its head against the rail, breath huffing warm into the air. Evelyn turned to him. I could cook supper tonight, if your cook doesn't mind. He'd trade you the whole kitchen if it means a night off. She smiled, small and genuine, and Callum's eyes softened in a way that made her chest ache a little. Back in the bunkhouse, she tied her hair up and washed her hands, then made her way to the cook tent. The man there handed her a sack of flour and a basket of onions without comment. She chopped, stirred, and worked in rhythm with the clatter of tin pans and the low voices drifting from the yard. When the stew was set to simmer, she stepped outside and found Callum leaning against the post, arms crossed loosely. I hope you're hungry, she said. I usually eat late. Then I'll save you a bowl. His gaze didn't leave her. You don't have to stay here, Evelyn. If you want to write your sister, see about going back. I'll help you. She didn't answer at first. Then she said, I didn't come all this way to turn back. He nodded, quiet understanding in his expression. Besides, she added, voice steady, I think I'd rather see what's ahead. Callum stepped off the post. Then I guess we'll see it together. The McLean ranch stretched wide beneath the pale light of early spring, its pastures greening along the creek where cottonwoods whispered softly in the breeze. Evelyn stood near the garden plot behind the main house, sleeves rolled to her elbows, fingernails dark with soil. She was planting onions in neat rows, the sun warming her back, her bonnet forgotten on the fence post beside her. Callum approached with a coil of rope slung over one shoulder, his boots quiet in the tilled earth. You're putting them in early, he noted, eyeing the straight lines she dug with the heel of her shoe. There's still frost at night, but the soil's turning, she said, brushing her hands against her apron. My mother always said onions could take a little cold. He crouched beside her, the rope resting at his side. You miss her. She passed when I was 17. Pneumonia took her before spring thaw. Callum didn't offer sympathy. He just pulled a weed from the edge of the row and crushed it between his fingers. That's when I learned how to keep a house, she added, quieter now. There wasn't anyone else to do it. He straightened, glancing toward the barn. I've got to check the south fence. You want to ride out there? Gets you off your knees a while. She wiped her hands on her skirt. I'd like that. They rode together on the same dun mare, Evelyn seated behind him, arms loose around his waist. The trail south curved along a dry ravine, scattered with yucca and rabbit brush. A hawk circled far above them, wings stretched wide against the sky. You always knew you'd work horses? She asked. I tried working cattle once. Broke a bull's horn my first week. Boss docked my pay and told me to stick to something I could read better. You read animals? He nodded once. They don't lie. You pay attention. They tell you what they need. The fence line was sagging in one spot, posts tilted from last week's wind. Callum dismounted and handed her the reins with a quiet word to keep the mare still. He worked with a steady rhythm, pulling the wire taut, tamping fresh earth around the posts with the back of his boot. Evelyn found a flat rock and sat watching him. The wind picked up, tugging at her skirt, and somewhere deeper in the ravine, a covey of quail burst into flight. You ever think on marriage? She asked suddenly. Callum didn't look up right away. When he did, his face was unreadable. I did once. What happened? She left before I asked. Took a job in Tucson. Never looked back. Evelyn folded her hands in her lap. I suppose we both know what it's like to be left standing. He set the hammer down and leaned against the post. You don't seem bitter. I was a little. But bitterness doesn't mend fences or plant onions. He smiled, then not wide, but something genuine that reached his eyes. No, it doesn't. They rode back slower than they'd come. The sun had dipped enough to cast long shadows across the ridgeline, and the scent of sage was stronger in the air. Evelyn kept one hand on the saddle, the other resting lightly against Callum's back. As they neared the ranch, she asked, What do you do when you're not working? I fish. Sometimes I read. There's a book of poetry I've been carrying around since I was 16. She blinked. You read poetry? Don't spread it around. I've got a reputation to keep. What kind of poetry? He hesitated, then said, the kind that gets quiet near the end. That night, after supper, Evelyn stepped out to the edge of the corral. The stars were out, and the lantern light from the bunkhouse flickered gold against the dirt. Callum joined her a few steps later, holding something wrapped in cloth. I had an extra, he said, handing it to her. Inside was a small book, worn at the corners, the leather soft from years of touch. I thought you said you didn't lend it, she said. I said I carried it. Didn't say I wouldn't share it. She held the book to her chest. Thank you. He didn't move away. You staying long? I haven't decided. He nodded slowly. Well, if you do, I'll put in a bigger garden. Could use more than onions. Evelyn tilted her head toward him. And if I stay, what else would you put in? Tomatoes. Maybe beans. Something that grows better when it's got company. She smiled, quiet and full. I think I could make room for that. Callum reached up and brushed a speck of dust from her cheek with the back of his hand, then let it fall. You've got good hands for growing. Her voice was steady as she said, so do you. They stood together beneath the stars, the night soft around them, the first threads of something steady and new tying between them without need for words. The mesquite trees had begun to bloom pale and feathery, dotting the edge of the pasture with signs of the season turning. Evelyn stood near the paddock one morning just after dawn, her apron still damp from rinsing the breakfast dishes. Beyond the rail, the young chestnut mare Callum had been breaking shifted with restless energy, her hooves edging the dust. You thinking of taking her out today? She asked, eyes on the horse's taut shoulders. Callum stepped up beside her, hat in hand. She's near ready, but not quite. Needs a little more time to carry trust in her feet. Evelyn didn't look at him. Not all of us get that luxury. He studied her a moment, then said, there's more than one kind of strength. She turned then. I wasn't strong when I stepped off that train. There's strength in waiting too, he said. You waited alone with no promise anyone was coming. That wasn't courage, she answered, voice low. That was desperation. Callum tilted his head. What's the difference if it kept you upright? The mare tossed her head and their attention shifted. Evelyn watched Callum's hand brush the rail, steady, quiet. The same way he approached people, never too fast, never loud. Would you teach me? She asked. He blinked. To ride? To read a horse. Like you do. He hesitated, then gave a single nod. Start with her. No, she said, looking toward the bay gelding she'd seen him ride before. That one. Rise easy, he said. He'll teach you more about yourself than about him. That's fine. They saddled the gelding together. She watched how he checked the cinch, how he laid his hand just behind the withers before mounting. She waited until he was settled, then climbed up behind him, her arms light around his waist. Out past the creek, the land opened into soft hills. Callum guided the horse into a slow walk, letting the gelding pick his own path through the dry grass. Evelyn leaned slightly against him, not from fear, but from something steadier, acceptance, maybe. The sky stretched wide above them, clouds gathering in the far west, the kind that might bring rain if the wind turned right. You ever think about what you'd be doing if life had gone different? She asked. He didn't answer right away. I used to think I'd enlist. After the war. But there wasn't a place left in it for me. Why not? I saw what it did to my brother. That was enough. She shifted slightly. I wanted to teach. I had a school lined up in Council Grove. But then Papa died and my sister married off quick and I had to keep the house. You any good with children? I don't know, she said. I never had a chance to find out. They rode in silence for a while. A pair of jackrabbits darted through the brush and the gelding flicked his ears but kept on steady. When they stopped near a dry wash, Callum dismounted first, then reached up to help her down. She slid from the saddle and landed lightly, the earth soft underfoot. He pulled a blanket from the saddlebag and spread it over a flat stretch of ground near a cottonwood sapling, the only shade for half a mile. She sat, legs tucked beneath her, watching as he knelt beside her and unslung a small tin of dried apples from his pack. You always carry those? Only when I'm riding with someone who hasn't seen this part of the land. She took one and bit into it thoughtfully. You know, you don't speak much about yourself unless asked. You don't either. I suppose I don't. He looked at her then, fully. But I want to know. She held his gaze. So do I. The quiet between them wasn't filled with distance anymore. It was something else, like a waiting room where only truth was allowed to enter. He reached into his coat pocket and drew out a folded scrap of paper. I wrote this a long time ago. Never showed it to anyone. She unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was rough but careful. Do you want me to read it out loud? He nodded once. She smoothed the page and read, When the dust settles and the sun lies low, I want to see someone still standing beside me, not because I asked, but because they chose to stay. She refolded it, hands gentle. That's not the kind that gets quiet at the end. That's the kind that stays. I didn't know that when I wrote it. You do now, she said. They didn't speak again until the sun dipped behind the edge of the ridge, and the light turned copper across the sand. On the ride back, she rested her cheek lightly against his back, and he reached up once, without looking, and touched her hand where it rested on his chest. Not a promise, not yet, but the shape of one, forming slow and sure, like roots under dry ground waiting for rain. Rain came the following week, not the kind that passed in a gust and left nothing behind, but the slow, soaking kind that softened the land and left the scent of wet cedar in every corner. Evelyn stood beneath the overhang of the barn, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders, watching the drops slide down the split rail fence. Chickens huddled under the wagon and the ranch dogs curled beside the cookhouse door, unmoving. Callum approached from the far side of the barn, his hat dripping and his boots thick with mud. I found the last of the strays up near the ridge, he said, setting a saddle blanket on the railing to dry. They'd taken shelter in a wash behind the arroyo. You all right? Her eyes swept over him, catching the way his left sleeve was torn just above the elbow. He followed her glance, caught it on a mesquite thorn. Nothing deep. She stepped forward and reached for his arm without asking. He didn't flinch as she rolled the fabric back and examined the scrape carefully. There's grit in it, she said. Come with me. In the bunkhouse, she set a tin basin on the stove and poured water to warm. Callum sat at the edge of the table, quiet while she cleaned the wound. Her fingers were gentle but sure, and he didn't speak until she tied the bandage off. You've done this before, he said. My father kept bees, she replied. One summer he tried to clear a nest from beneath the porch. Got stung across his whole arm. I learned to treat swelling before I learned to bake bread. Callum looked at her a moment, then said, You could run this place if you wanted. I don't want to run it, she said, sitting beside him. But I wouldn't mind belonging to it. He turned toward her. There's a difference? There is to me, she said. I've worked hard my whole life because I had to. But this is the first place I've worked because I want to. His gaze dropped to her hands. You've changed things here. I've only mended shirts and filled stew pots. You've steadied the air, he said. House feels different when you're in it. She looked at him then, not with surprise, but with the quiet certainty of someone who had waited weeks for a seed to sprout and now saw the green tip breaking ground. You're not afraid of stillness, she said. I've never liked noise that doesn't mean anything. Then I suppose we've both found what we needed. That night, the rain eased and the bunkhouse emptied early as men turned in before another day of wet saddle blankets and slick trails. Evelyn stood outside, the lantern light from the porch casting long shapes across the yard. Callum joined her, arms crossed loosely, watching the stars return in slivers between the clouds. I've been thinking, he said. There's a stretch of land west of the creek, mostly flat, a few cottonwoods. Good for building. She waited, watching the way his jaw shifted, as if the words weren't heavy but simply hard to say out loud. I've saved enough to put up a house, he said. Just a small one, 2 rooms to start, but it'd be ours, if you wanted. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped closer, until her hands rested lightly against his chest. I don't need a big house, she said. Just a place where I can plant beans beside the onions. And someone to come in from the rain with. His hand slid gently to the back of her neck, his thumb brushing the edge of her hairline. Then stay, he said. I already have. The kiss that followed wasn't sudden or rushed, it was quiet, like the hush before morning, like wind through dry grass. When they pulled apart, neither of them smiled, but the stillness between them was full of something solid and lasting. They were married a month later, beneath the cottonwoods by the creek. The ranch hands stood in their cleanest shirts, and the cook brought out jars of preserves and warm bread from the brick oven. Mrs. Townsend from the main house stitched Evelyn's dress by hand from muslin and lace left over from her own daughter's wedding. Callum built their home with lumber hauled in from Bisbee, 2 rooms, just as he'd said. Evelyn filled it slowly, one shelf at a time, never rushing. She planted a garden out back, and by summer the beans climbed strong beside the onions. Some evenings they sat on the porch without speaking, her hand resting on his leg, his fingers tracing idle patterns along her wrist. They didn't need to talk to know what the other was thinking. They had both been left before. They had both stood alone. And now they didn't have to anymore. Come autumn, she stood in the doorway one morning, a letter in her hand from her sister back east, asking if she was well. Evelyn looked out over the pasture, where Callum was walking back from the barn, his coat dusted with straw and his face creased with sun. She smiled, folded the letter, and set it aside. She was well, and she was home,